Richie Mo'unga is back. The news we've been waiting for, to be honest, and not just since the potential injury to Billy Proctor, but ever since Richie Mo'unga announced that he was going to return to New Zealand in a bid to make the Rugby World Cup in 2027. We have been looking at rugby's greatest rivalry as his potential return and did not make the initial squad. However, after the performances in the NPC, we knew that the first time that there'll be an injury within the All Black squad, within the back line, that he was always going to be a potential candidate. And that's exactly what has happened. Dave Rennie has made the SOS call, and he is going to be parachuted into the squad. And interesting to sort of see what kind of role he plays within this All Black side, because we know the pedigree. The last time he played for the All Blacks was the 2023 World Cup finals. So he's a player that's been there, that's done that on his day, one of the best fly halves in the world. And now he comes into an environment where he will not be the first choice. He's going to have to try and work onto it. And it's going to be a very interesting dynamic to see how he gets slotted back into the squad, as well as what the reaction has been to him being called up. Before we get into it any further, please do smash a like on the video. Please do subscribe to the channel as well. A couple of injuries to the All Blacks so far in the tour, and that's always the big part of these tours, and whether you can kind of get through the tour without losing too many players along the way. And the latest one was Billy Proctor, against the Sharks, and it was confirmed that he would miss the tour very shortly afterwards, but we hadn't had a confirmation of who the replacement was going to be, although I think we all had a pretty good sneaky sort of suspicion that it was going to reach Richie Mo'unga. And the reason for that is, I think if we look back at the Beauden Barrett performance against the Stormers, I think he had a couple of all right moments, but overall didn't look very convincing. Damian McKenzie rolled his ankle on Tuesday, so whilst they expect him to be fit for the first test, there is potentially a slight injury concern, which means that at the moment, Ruben Love, who played really well on Tuesday, and I think definitely the nailed-on starter in the number 10 jersey, hasn't got much backup. And whilst that's a luxury to have in terms of Beauden Barrett being an 144 test fly half, he's not playing his best rugby at the moment. And Richie Mo'unga is someone who provides genuine world-class depth in the number 10 jersey, which, especially for New Zealand, is so important. I mean, a fly half is important for all teams, but almost especially within the All Blacks, especially the way they want to play now. We are seeing, I think that's why Ruben Love's really taken a step forward, because we are seeing him being allowed to be the playmaker in the traditional New Zealand sense, where he's going to dictate the play, where we're going to dictate, where we're going to attack, how we're going to attack, being an attacking threat himself. I think that's a very important part that we're seeing with this All Black side, is that Ruben Love himself is becoming a running threat. So it's a really straightforward call as far as I'm concerned. And I think what's going to be interesting is that Richie Mo'unga's not been there for the last couple of years, which means he hasn't gone through the inverted commas trauma and the trials and tribulations of the Scott Robertson era. So he comes in with a sort of non-tainted, idea of what this All Black setup is. The last time he played for them was the World Cup final. So he kind of comes in without having to go through the last couple of years of the ups and downs. I think that's going to be really positive, because he's going to come into an All Blacks environment where his last point of reference was World Cup final. Top two best teams in the world, losing by a point, being that close to being a world champion. That was the kind of squad, the expectation, the environment that he was used to. And he'll bring in those standards. He'll arrive back and say, right, well, that is what it was. That's where I've been part of. I've been part of some really good World Cup squads. This is what the level is. And it is a very new All Black squad, to what it was back in 2023. If you go and look at, some of the massive players they've lost, and, you think of the Whitelocks, the Brady Metallics, for example, there's so many other players, Sam Cane. There's so much experience that they've lost, Aaron Smith, and that it is a very different side. So I think the experience he'll bring will be one of the biggest parts of it, especially within the group as well. Whether he'll play this weekend, I doubt it. Whether he'll play in the first test, maybe on the bench, but he'll probably play at Ellis Park, which is really exciting from a Lions fans' point of view. The fact that they might be able to get to see him play in the number 10 jersey, but the experience he'll bring to the squad in general is going to be a huge boost. And that's where I think it's a really good selection, is that bringing in a bit of experience, bringing some leadership in, and also seeing where he is. You're a year out to the World Cup, so you're now at the tweaking stage, really, of what that final squad's going to be. Dave Rennie is really up against it in terms of being able to have to turn this All Black side around on a very short timeline. And they've looked like they've taken a step forwards, but obviously we'll only really know where they are when they play the Box on the 22nd of August. But now you get an opportunity for 4 or 5 weeks to see where he's at in the environment as well, because we've often seen some players come in and do really well on the field or not do particularly well, but we're kept in squads. And what we don't see is what happens off the pitch, and that's a big part of it. In terms of having figures within the squad that bring a calmness, that lift the standards, that bring a sense of authority, that are real sort of role models within the squad for younger players. And Richie Mo'unga is all of those things. So he really does boost the squad across the board, not just in terms of what he can actually bring on the field itself. However, it's not been met without a little bit of controversy. It's at the end of the day, he's a player who only covers 10. That I think is a very important part to make. And the reason I made that point is that Dave Rennie was criticized for leaving Du Plessis-Carriffy behind, who had a really, really good Super Rugby season. Led us side to the title and wasn't selected. But one of the big reasons in terms of that was that he's not a versatile player. He doesn't cover a lot of positions. Ironically, they then had a bit of a piss take, and in the NPC, he actually turned out inside center and got a man of the match performance. But his versatility counted against him. And now you've lost the center and brought in a out-and-out fly half. So that starts to sort of prompt a bit of, different rules for different people type of situation. But in terms of how this actually does work logistically, Rieko Ioane is the player there that sorts it out, really. He's a player who's played a lot of rugby on the wing, came through at the wing, but then moved to outside center and has probably played the majority of his career there, really, especially in the recent few years. But I think to his detriment, to be honest, I always thought that Rieko Ioane was the best on the wing. And, I think that New Zealand for a while struggled from a center's point of view. And it was almost sort of a case of, yes, Ioane's probably better on the wing, but he's also probably better than the other 13 options that we have. So that was kind of where they had to sort of grapple with that for a while. But he covers center, which means that you've lost Billy Proctor, but you've got a player who can cover that position. And as a result, you can bring in a Richie Mo'unga who only covers 10, but that's kind of all he needs to do, really. But it's not been without its controversy. A lot of people talking about the fact that, how do you leave out Du Plessis-Carriffy, talk about the fact that he's not versatile, and then happily bring in a Richie Mo'unga who doesn't fit that mold of versatility. So it's an interesting addition. I think it's just great for the tour, and that's the big thing. This creates excitement. This generates headlines. This creates matchups. When we had Mo'unga versus Honda Apollo in the 2023 World Cup final, will we see that during this tour? The last time, there'll be a lot of scar tissue for Richie Mo'unga against the Springboks. That's who he last played against, and now he can potentially make his return 3 years later against the same side. So there's a couple of nice sort of subplots, really. But let me know what you think about the move, and down in the comments below. Please do smash the like on the video. Please do subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Steve, and I'll chat to you soon.